Hello, everyone. This is JJ Risha with Pismo Ventures. And today I have with me Jeff Bocan. Jeff is a partner at Okapi Capital Ventures. He will introduce himself in a few minutes. Before we get started, let me tell you a little bit about our program for today. So we'll be for an hour. After introductions, we will just open it for discussions with Jeff. If you guys have questions, please do not hesitate to ask your questions. In the YouTube channel that you are on, there's a chat box. Just all you have to do is type your questions there, and we will receive them. Please don't wait till the end to ask your questions. Just ask them anytime, and as appropriate, I will kind of weave them in for Jeff to answer them. If Jeff cannot answer any questions or we run out of time, if you have any questions for him or myself, you can always email it to pvinfo@pismoventures, and I will forward it to him accordingly. Just to kind of tell you what this program is all about, we've been doing this for a few months now, and the purpose behind it is really to help startups, entrepreneurs in our ecosystem understand and navigate really the vibrant community we have by bringing on board thought leaders, investors, serial entrepreneurs, in order to provide the listeners with really pertinent information about the current climate, investment news, what everyone's doing, how to start a company, how to build a company, how to grow a company, and eventually how to exit a company. That's what we're trying to do. Just wanted to tell you a little bit about Pismo Ventures. So we are a unique combination of a venture firm, a virtual accelerator, and a venture studio, and we also have a software development arm. So what we do is we help build businesses. We also invest in businesses, both resources or services and also cash. We develop software if you need software. If you don't need to, that's not the only thing we do. So pretty much agnostic. We facilitate funding as needed, and we open doors. We help our portfolio companies really succeed as we open doors to them from the network that we have. We are building a fund this year, and hopefully towards the end of this year we'll have it ready. We are a value-based hybrid cash and equity startup-friendly model. So we engage on a month-to-month basis, no long-term contract, and we are a true business partner and investor when it comes to our portfolio companies. Jeff, before we get started, I want to remind everyone that if you have not subscribed to our YouTube channel, please click on it right now, and also follow us on social media. Jeff, thank you for coming.
You got it. Happy to be here, JJ.
Thank you so much. I know there's a lot that we need to talk about, so I will get started by asking you to tell us a little bit about you, your background, and how did you get to Okapi?
Sure. So I got the startup bug coming out or during business school. I got really interested in that. I was at University of Virginia, and I did a summer internship as one of the first employees at Honest Tea, which is an organic, freshly brewed iced tea. Maybe you've had some before, or your kids had the Honest Kids juice boxes. But I was one of the first employees there and spent my internship helping launch the product west of the Mississippi. And, I did that from initially my bedroom in the Tenderloin in San Francisco. And then later we had a really small office in Soma up there. But it was an incredible experience for me. I was doing literally everything from, I literally drove the truck and delivered the tea to some of our first accounts up there, some of the first Whole Foods markets up there. Berkeley Bowl up there was my very first account, for people who are familiar with that area. But I literally, drove the tea to the distribution center, or a truck to the distribution center in Oakland, where the tea had come off of train, basically coming from the East Coast where it was made. And I drove around, which was a harrowing experience, driving around like a 24-foot truck around San Francisco. But the deliveries aside, I mean, I was helping do every element of getting a business going, you know, from the sales and marketing and even the mundane stuff like, you know, delivering product. But I got the startup bug there, and I had a chance to move to London, England, really for my wife's job. She's a lawyer. Honest Tea was a really struggling startup at that time. I was barely getting paid, so it was kind of easy to say, all right, you're getting the high paid job in London. Let's move there for your job and not the tea. And when I was out there, I got hooked up with, I was networking around and I wanted to work at a startup. And I was doing an interview with a venture capitalist because I wanted to work at one of his portfolio companies. And that interview turned into him saying, hey, rather than you work for the portfolio company, why don't you work for me? And I said, look, I don't know anything about venture capital, but I'll work my butt off if you give me the chance. That sounds great. And he was really insistent that, you know, venture capital was an apprenticeship sort of business anyway, that you really needed to learn by doing and working with people who really knew what they were doing, and like an old apprenticeship sort of business. And so he brought me in. That was Sean Luchins at Saffron Hill Ventures and Ranjit Bhatia. And I worked with the two of them for a couple years, and that was back in the year 2000. And I've been doing venture ever since. I went into a lot of detail there, but I've been doing venture for about 20 years. I was at Saffron Hill a couple years, a firm called Beringia, where I was for 11 years. And I worked in London, Santa Monica, and then Ann Arbor, Michigan, doing venture in those communities. And when I was in Michigan, I came upon the business Mofi, and some folks here in maybe even on the show, got to know people at Mofi. Maybe they knew some of the founders, Daniel Huang and Sean Doherty. But I came upon Sean and Daniel when I was in Michigan. Mofi started in Kalamazoo, Michigan. A lot of people don't realize that. We've later moved the headquarters out here to Orange County. But I was the first equity investor in Mofi, or at least of doing like a venture round. And I got more and more involved as a board member between 2010 and 2013, and the company got to about 100 million in revenue. And Sean and Daniel asked me to come on board and help run the business with them. So I moved out here in 2013 to help take the business. We took it from 100 to 250 million in revenue and sold it to Zag. And at that point, I joined Okapi Ventures. I was able to come back on the venture capital side. I had the chance to meet Mark Averett, my partner now, who founded Okapi in 2005. I was living in Santa Monica doing venture at that time. And there were only a handful of VCs in Southern California, period, at that time. And we were some of the only VCs under the age of 40. So we became friends and have stayed in touch. And once I moved back out here, we reconnected. And once it was clear we were going to sell Mofi, he said, hey, what are you going to do after you sell Mofi? And why don't you join me? So I did. And I've been doing venture here. And then at Okapi, just really quickly, we've been around for 15 years, doing early stage, traditional seed investments. We focus just on technology companies now. In the past, we had done healthcare companies. Now it's all software-driven businesses for the most part. We invest. It's usually that we're kind of leading the first institutional round that an entrepreneur is raising. The rounds are usually $500,000 to 3 million or so in size. With us usually doing about half of that round, half to all of that round. We do $500,000 to 1.5 million on our first check, and we usually reserve 2 to 3 times our first check for follow-on investments. And then we've had some good success here. Cybersecurity is an area that we've done particularly well in. We were fortunate to be invested in CrowdStrike, which has been great. But we have a handful of other investments in cyber that are doing really well. But there's a lot of areas that we like, but it's mostly B2B, enterprise-focused, software-driven businesses.
That's really awesome. I did not know that much about Okapi. I'm sure the audience did not know either. Thanks for the introduction there. So this is going to be an easy conversation. We'll just ask you a few questions, and hopefully the audience will start asking questions as well. So my first question to you, what are your primary sources of deal flow? How does Okapi find all these sources?
Right.
All these deals?
Yeah, that is that's a good question. It's one of the real challenges of venture. It's how do you source opportunities? How do you select opportunities? And then how do you manage those? Those are like the three things that a venture capitalist needs to do extremely well. But that sourcing piece for us, I mean, it largely comes from our personal networks, but in saying that, I don't mean like, just like our friends, although that can be part of it, but it's, like you're a source of my deal flow, for example. It's like people who are, fellow investors and movers and shakers in the technology area. So, I spend a lot of my time getting to know people like yourself, and a lot of the opportunities come from people like you. You're working with other entrepreneurs, and what we want is to be, at least as a firm, to be kind of top of mind for someone who's in Southern California, wanting that first seed round to think, oh, you should talk to the folks at Okapi. You're a good fit for what they're doing. So it's mostly from people that we've gotten to know over the years. A lot of my deals come from other venture capitalists, to be honest, and they could be ones who are later stage than us. They're kind of up the food chain a little bit, and a lot of times they'll say, "Look, I've come upon this awesome entrepreneur, or this was a great product manager who was at one of our portfolio companies who's left to spin out and start something new. You should check her out. She's got onto an amazing project. It's too early for us to get involved, but this could be a fit for you." I mean, a lot of our opportunities come through other investors, and ultimately, I feel like this comes down to contributing to the overall ecosystem when you can, kind of leads to good opportunities. So it's being a good board member when you're on the boards that I sit on. There are other people on those boards, so I always want to be kind of the best board member that I could be, because I mean, a lot of source of referrals come from other, whether it's former board members, other entrepreneurs that we've worked with in the past. I just feel like your reputation really drives deal flow, and at least for us, that's really important. And for me personally, it's been my focus over the last 20 years is just to be the best person you could be. So I think it's being nice and not rude. I mean, unfortunately, there are a lot of jerks in our industry. So I don't want to be one of those. And people they get to choose who they want to partner with, whether it's who do you want to co-invest with, who do you want to take capital from, and you don't want to take it from a jerk. And so anyway, I focus on the people that I like working with, and who I find to where I respect their intelligence, or maybe they have a unique perspective that I don't, and you get to know those folks. But a lot of it really comes from those sorts of personal relationships. And of course, it's like conversations like this. I mean, look, obviously there's people on the line here, and maybe some opportunities will come out of this. I mean, so we'll do some public speaking and get involved with the community. Yeah. But a lot of it's just through one-on-one conversations.
Yeah, networking. I know, I see you everywhere. You're networking everywhere as well. You said something that's really interesting, and I think people don't realize how important that is. And that is you said that sometimes you, as a venture capitalist, people come to you, or maybe they come from another VC and they tell you, it's a great person. They started a company. They did great. We want to invest in her or in him. So it's all about people, isn't it, Jeff? And maybe you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, no, it's very much a people-driven business, and I think the way that whether people want to work in venture capital or whether you want to get capital and have people making references for you, it's doing what you say you're going to do. It's some of the simple things, but because people are going to be less likely to open doors for you if you are a person that's maybe not as reliable, or have bad attitude, or where there's a lot of friction. I mean, unfortunately, in startups, there are situations. It's hard, and there often can be drama where either there can be a lot of money at stake, or worse, there can be no money at stake, where things are kind of falling apart. And being able to exit things gracefully, even when they're not going well, I feel like is really imperative. And I mean, there's a lot of failure in what we do in the technology space. And when you're trying to do something hard, the likelihood of failure is pretty high. And being able to, I think, how people behave in those challenging situations really says a lot. And before we invest in teams, as we are recruiting others, I mean, we do so much back channel referencing. I mean, the world is pretty small. We all have pretty established networks,
especially, right?
Right. With LinkedIn and these other tools, you're a couple clicks away from being like, all right, I can find out how this person was at this one company. And we just really try to, that would be a deal killer for a lot of us. A lot of deals that we do, when we do those references, and if they come back, remotely bad, I mean, obviously we hear something bad, we just don't take one data point. We'll want to kind of confirm all that. Because I mean, sometimes people, their memory is bad, or some people have an ulterior motive for maybe saying something, exaggerating something that wasn't true. But
who knows? You're right.
Right.
Yeah.
But we want to get to the bottom of that and only work with people that are going to be good people to work with. I mean, it's stressful, it's difficult, and you only kind of want to go to battle with someone that you think is going to, they have the right sort of values and work ethic and collaboration skills to work with others in challenging situations, because it's really, really hard.
Yeah. So just one more question on that. Do you actually do background checks other than doing all the references? Do you do background checks?
If we don't know the person, if none of my partners have either worked with the person or know someone that has really well, we will do it.
Okay.
And it's gotten easier to do these days, to do like some really basic background checks. It used to be pretty expensive. I mean, when I was doing this 15 years ago, it was like, thousands of dollars to run just even basic background check to just find out, what their police record was or anything. But now that can be done for, $49 on a lot of internet services. So we'll usually do that. But if it's someone, if the person, is a known quantity through our broader network, we may not. But yes, we will in some cases. We don't do drug tests, stuff like that, but like we will try to find if there's some kind of record if you don't know the person.
Yeah. Okay. So at TCA, we do background checks, of course, especially if we don't know anything about that person. All right. So we've got some questions that are coming through. Let me pop them in for a second here. This is from Saloni. Why does Okapi not seek healthcare companies to fund anymore?
Yeah, that's a good question, and unfortunately, it's a function of the size of our fund. So our funds are relatively small as a seed stage fund. Our Fund 2 was just about $20 million. Our Fund 3 is a bit over 30. But the healthcare space, unfortunately, it's very capital intensive generally, and the time horizons to see through technologies to exit are usually quite long, and that translates into these companies needing to raise a lot of capital. And with a small fund, what we found on our funds 1 and 2, that we were getting, we couldn't, these companies would raise 3, 4, 5, sometimes 7 rounds of funding, and we didn't have deep enough pockets to participate all along the way. And kind of 2 things happen there. One, you end up being a really small shareholder on the cap table, and you kind of lose your influence along the way, and you end up kind of along for the ride. And you aren't able to, you're kind of at the whims of what everyone else, the decisions that other people are making with little ability to influence. And that wasn't always the case, but on the whole, that would be one dynamic that would happen. And so that'd be one thing. And then 2, the path on healthcare deals is not always kind of up and to the right. It's not always a smooth curve. It can be a little bit of a roller coaster. And there can be down rounds on some of these venture or on some of these funding rounds for these healthcare businesses, whether maybe they had a hiccup with one of their FDA trials, or they had to redesign their program that they were doing for their testing, and it's going to take more capital, and they didn't hit some milestones. And when these down rounds hit, there can be some terms that if you can't follow your pro rata amount. So let's say you own 3% of the company,
then you lose.
Right, and they were raising just $100. You'd have to put in your $3 to kind of maintain your pro rata. And if you don't have deep enough pockets to do that, there can be these extra dilutive measures, terms. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of known as a cram down round, but it can be extremely penal. And so again, like we just saw that if you don't have the deep enough pockets to see your investment through end to end, you can really get screwed along the way. And unfortunately, with the smaller fund, we just didn't really we didn't feel like we could play that game in the right sort of way. So we stopped investing in that space.
I think it makes a lot of sense. I'm glad you explained it that way, because most people don't understand really what it takes, and especially with the cram downs down the road. I mean, that's what happens with angels as well. We, especially,
Yes.
when we go to future rounds and there's another $3 million or $5 million, and you can't participate, of course, as angels, most of the time you're not going to be able to participate. Then you end up being diluted heavily, and it's not great. Although, especially on the seed side with you, and the angels are a little bit earlier than you, but so because it's on the seed side, then you take all the risk, or
Yes.
potentially all the risk, and someone takes all the reward down the road. All right, so there's a bunch of questions around how can someone present to Okapi? So there's 3 questions around that. So maybe, I know most of the time, Jeff, like, you would take an email from me, say, hey, look, this is a good company. Would you take a look at it? Other than that, how would you let someone present?
Sure. I'm always happy to look at opportunities. So people can email me at, my last name is Bocan, Bocan, Bocan at okapivc.com. I may not, I get back to everybody almost always within 2 weeks, but sometimes it takes a little bit longer. But most of the time it's, I try to look at those when I can. But sending some sort of summary materials about what you're doing, very brief explanation about what you're doing in the email, and then whether it's a PowerPoint deck or a 1-pager or something that kind of summarizes the core of what you're working on, where I can get back and look and see, all right, is this a fit for what we like to do in terms of the stage, the sector? But then I think it gets more nuanced, I guess, as you get into, okay, yes, it's technology and it's software driven, which is what we look for. I think from there, we're really looking at the market size, in terms of, is this, and the short way of saying it is I really try to understand, what problem are you trying to solve as the entrepreneur? Now, what is that problem? And is it a really big problem? And I mean big problem where it is both a problem that's experienced by many people, or it's a high value problem that's maybe not experienced by many, but because the dollars that people would be willing to pay for that solution are really large. So there may not be lots of customers, but you can have some really successful businesses with only 100, 200 customers. And if they're paying $1 million a year for the solution, that can be a really strong business. Versus a problem that's like not such a burning problem for millions of people. I will maybe stray away from some of those. So I really want to understand the problem that you're trying to solve, and then 2, of course, then what's the solution, and why is your solution so much better than what's available now, or what is different about your solution that is going to allow you to grab a chunk of market share, either from some existing people or create some green space in a problem area that hasn't been kind of secured yet. But really want to focus on that problem area. So there's kind of like the market dynamics and market risk is like my number 1 focus once I get through the initial screens of like, does this even fit for what we do as a firm? And then of course there's stage. Like we are earlier stage, at least as our firm. It's different for every firm. We're typically we're usually the first round of capital. Our valuations are typically below 10 million. They're usually in the 3 to 10 million range for starting out. The businesses usually have some revenue, but not much. They may even have up to $1 million of recurring revenue, but it's usually pretty small. So if something's too far along, we may not get involved, or if something's way too early. We usually don't get involved pre-product. Or pre-product, so not often pre-product, although we will get involved pre-revenue. So if we want to generally see that someone's using the product. We are trying not to take, we're trying to minimize the technology risk that we're taking on. Like we'd rather not try to figure out like, oh, let's put in the money and I hope this works. And some investors do that. That's just not a fit for us. But we'd like to see that whether the software is working and there are users utilizing it, even if it's not the full built out product, but if like some core is functioning, we're not so concerned like, will this work? It's more about some of the business dynamics of, can we sell this into the market? Can we build on the product? Can we win versus competitors? So we want to minimize the technology risk. And then the last piece is really kind of on the execution risk around the team. We really want to understand, like, all right, is this team, all right, yes, this is a good idea and it's a good plan and the product seems compelling. Is this team situated that they can get the business from kind of where it is for the next couple of years? Are the core pieces in place? And what's our assessment of their ability to succeed? So those are the things that we're looking for when people send things along to us. So hopefully that can be addressed in, whether it's
a 1-pager,
5 to 15 slides or a 1-pager or something where it's like, all right, just give me a hint that like these areas can be addressed. What we don't want to see necessarily out of the gate is like a 60-page business plan and with all of the details. And I think, well, one, I probably wouldn't read the whole thing. I mean, maybe flip through it, but I think, I'm trying to check some initial boxes around, does it fit for us? What are the market dynamics? What's the degree of the either technical risk that remains? What the traction is that they may have with users out of the gate? And then what's the ability of the team to succeed in taking the business forward? Those are kind of my initial screen. So if people send stuff, email's generally best. And I will almost always insist on reading an email or something, seeing something first before taking a meeting. Because I don't have I like meeting people, but I just don't have enough time to, if I took a meeting for every email that I got, I wouldn't do anything but that.
You'd be in meetings all the time. Yeah.
Right. Which I would love to do, but I have made investments. I'm on 6 boards. Like there's other things that I need to do. So I just don't have enough time to meet with everybody. So that is kind of my one filter. It's like, all right, let me at least understand what you're doing. And if it's generally a fit, we can do a follow-up call. And if it's not, I'll try to point you in the right direction of someone who might be interested.
So I have to say, everything you said, we do at Pismo Ventures, and I do the exact same thing. As you gotta send me something before I meet with you, because there's too much to do, and also you gotta fit all the different criterias that you said. But we cater to a little bit earlier companies. So they would be, the next step would be, they graduate from us, they go to you. The same thing with TCA as well. So, that we're doing kind of pretty much the same thing at Tecos Angels as well.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of questions coming through. So one of the question is related to, well, I think you answered that question. So are you looking at the business model, or are you looking at the individuals and their skills and characteristics? So,
well, the answer is both. They're both really imperative. For the team, absolutely. But the team takes time. Someone can have a nice resume and be a total jerk. And that takes time to suss out, and it's actually gotten a little harder now with all the COVID stuff. We're picking that up over video isn't as easy. But again, we do a lot of the background references that we can. And a lot of it is, I do like to get to know the management teams as well as I can before we are kind of really pull the trigger on the investment. So I would want to go out for a meal and just get to know them socially and just understand what their priorities are. And really it's all about their values. These are long-term partnersps that you're signing up for,
multi-year, exactly.
Yeah. These investments, it's 3 to 10 years. So it's, most marriages don't last that long. So, it's not to be taken lightly. So the team dynamic and do I enjoy working with this person is a really critical one.
Yeah.
But the business model matters a lot too, and maybe we'll talk about it later. But for us, scalability is just a huge area of focus for us. I haven't mentioned that yet, but that will be one thing I'm really looking at across for every element of the business. Is what are the abilities of this business to grow really quickly. And that's kind of what scalability is all about, where it can get really large and do so with the right sort of unit economics. And we haven't talked about unit economics yet, but that really matters to me as well. It's less of an issue with software, although it can be if your software isn't deployed easily, or maybe there's a huge amount of upfront integration that's involved, or in some businesses, there's a lot of data that they're having to invest into to deliver the insights. And sometimes the margin, if you don't have control of those data costs, you can lose your margins, and that can be a problem. So we'll want to understand those before we invest. But we'll look for scalability in a lot of these things across the board.
So Jeff, tell the audience, what do you mean by unit economics? I'm sure not many understand what that means.
Sure. It's really about just the profitability of the product or service that you're trying to deliver. So if it's a hardware, if it's, this container, it's like, well, how much does it cost for me to make this and deliver it to a customer versus how much are they going to buy it? So, and then the difference between what they pay for it and what it costs you to deliver that product, not just pay for the raw materials, but to completely deliver everything. So if it's shipping costs or, the full landed cost and delivered cost, what's left for you at the end of that? And
so is it the gross profit, or is it,
yes, ultimately it is the gross profit, the gross margin. Yes. But so when we think about unit economics, that's primarily, we're talking about gross margins.
Okay.
So of both the hardware and software product. However, marketing costs and customer acquisition costs are part of that as well. So yes, gross margin is important, and the gross margins can be very attractive. But if it costs you, if your gross margin is $50, but it costs you $100 to win that customer, or either the advertising costs or the cost of the sale, it was you had to have a salesperson involved for X number of hours, or put someone on a plane and do an in-person demo or whatever. If those don't work out such that, you can get a very profitable business eventually, that can be a big problem. So you want to look at all of those costs that are kind of, not only after gross margin, but marketing expense, the cost of acquiring those customers, the
lifetime value of that customer, right? Yeah,
exactly. So we'll want to try to understand that. And that's an imperative thing to understand.
Right.
Unfortunately, I've invested in some businesses in the past where the unit economics were not strong. And some of my worst investments actually are those that where the unit economics were weak. Some assumptions were made that things were going to get better and they didn't, or that they didn't have a lot of room for to handle something disruptive, and they had a fine margin. And when some core assumptions changed, they fell in trouble. My worst investment ever was in the smartphone related market. It was the America's largest recycler and refurbisher of cell phones. So I don't even remember back in the day, when flip phones were super cheap, and when people were done with them, if they didn't just leave it in a drawer, they'd drop it off at a Starbucks, and they'd be like this little campaign, cell phones for soldiers. And you drop your phone off at Best Buy or whatever. Well, our company was that. We received all of those phones, millions and millions of these phones, and then we'd refurbish them, clean them up, and usually sell them in overseas markets. It became at one point it was very successful, and then I was like, we were high-fiving ourselves at my firm. We thought we had this great investment. It was doing $50 million in revenue. It was kicking out $5 to $8 million in profits, and then the iPhone came out. And then just smartphones in general got going. But once a phone went from something that was cheap and disposable really to something that was expensive and something that people held longer or that they traded in for other value, the unit economics of that whole industry changed. And we couldn't change quick enough, and our margins weren't all that strong, and we ended up taking a total zero on that investment. And that's a whole other story, but we couldn't pivot fast enough, and largely our unit economics weren't great, and we couldn't find some that were strong with that new dynamic. And it's my worst deal ever, unfortunately. It wasn't a bad one out of the gate. For a couple of years, it was great, and then it just went south.
All right. Okay, so maybe there's a question about IoT. Do you do IoT companies? They're both hardware, software?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yes, we're in a couple in our current portfolio. Actually, I wrote a term sheet for one Friday, and I was just telling JJ before as we got started, I was literally marking it up before I came on this call. That's in the IoT space. So we do like that space a lot. We like hardware, software-enabled hardware.
And it's growing like crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, and we also
All right.
like software that's servicing that space. So even if it's not the hardware elements, one of our investments is one down in San Diego we did several months ago called Ubic Security. And it's a cybersecurity play around the IoT space predominantly. You can imagine like locking down Ring security cameras, for example, but like, taking edge devices that aren't all that smart, but fully connected and have some very sensitive data potentially, and being able to have very strong encryption capabilities around that data. So, but in short, solving problems around IoT. IoT is great, but there can be a lot of issues with it. So, but we like that space generally. So absolutely.
Yeah, that's good. So this is also a similar question. It's from Mark. When is the best time to raise the first round of funding for a hardware IoT startup? Prototype phase, beta phase, test phase, or after some kind of a Kickstarter?
Good question. And it's one I'm literally debating even with this deal that I'm working on now. Well, and even around Kickstarter, I would say more around that beta test phase. I mean, ideally it's post prototype, and because I talked about technology risk earlier, a lot of investors don't want to take a bet of like whether you can get the thing to work.
Right. Nobody wants to do that.
Right. So if you can get past that, I mean, sometimes it's hard to. Sometimes it takes money to figure that out. But like the farther along you can prove out the technology, the better. And then at that point, people are only taking risk around manufacturability risk, which is usually not so large unless you're making something. You have some weird materials in there, or have some crazy thermal issues, or it's really small, or whatever it might be. But like generally, there are a lot of really great factories around the world that can make most things. So there's not a lot of manufacturability risk, but it's more about can the hardware, the device do what you want it to do, and then around durability. Hopefully you can have some proof that the product is in the field and can last longer, or if there's installation risk. I mean, there's an investment that I made in our current fund where we kind of blew it and not vetting out the durability of it. No, it wasn't so much the durability of the product. It was the ability of the product to be installed easily. So the tech worked, and the units that they had in the field were doing what they were supposed to do. But what we didn't vet out enough was how easy is it going to be to install, to have other people installing our product versus our team.
That's interesting.
And that was something where we didn't diligence that enough. I mean, we of course asked some questions and tried to understand it, but it would have been better to have seen someone else install that product that wasn't one of our own employees, who kind of knew where the bodies were buried basically, and knew which specific, the order of events or whatever it may be, just making it really clear. So, but the farther you are along in that spectrum, the better. Kickstarter is a really interesting one. Some people have done great with Kickstarter, and it's been very successful and imperative for them to not only create awareness about their product, but to just even fund what they're doing.
Yeah.
But I feel like, generally I'm kind of down on it if you don't have to. I think it's a nice fallback option that you can go to if you need to. But it's a huge distraction. It takes a lot of effort to get going. And now you have actually real customers, and then they're very vocal customers too. So if your product, you get it out there and it's not working that well, and often you get these terrible reviews from these, people who are on Kickstarter are usually, they're willing to try stuff, but they can be pretty brutal on things that aren't working as well. And so I think it's a little bit playing with fire, and it's really distracting. So if you don't have any other choice, then by all means, but if you can make it to some kind of product launch without having done Kickstarter, and where you can, I don't know if you're selling into retail channels or into B2B channels, but if you can avoid Kickstarter, my advice is generally to avoid it. Unless it's part of like a broader strategy that you have, where you're really going to invest a lot into the marketing channels on it and really hammer it, and you are ready to engage with 10,000 customers out of the gate, which isn't trivial. Even just shipping the product to hundreds of people or even thousands of people, if you're 3 people in a garage, like that can take, that's all of someone's time at some point that they could be working on the product or something that's usually higher value than. So it's a hard one.
There's a lot of potential risks that you can have. One is you may not have the product shipped in time, then people are going to get angry. And the other thing that a lot of people talk about all the time is now you launch something that's unique and somebody will copy it and make it better and faster, and they'll launch it in China and they'll sell millions before you can even get off the ground. So
absolutely,
it's potentially a lot of risk.
Some of when I was at Mofi, we had factories all over the world, but predominantly in Southeast Asia, and those factories absolutely have people who are just crawling Kickstarter looking for things that look like a great idea, and they start making them. Absolutely. And they have really talented engineers. These can be factories with 100 EEs, and they have mechanical engineers, or what they can make stuff so fast.
Reverse engineering is easy. Engineering is hard. All right, I got a question from Yuri Modri. He's one of our TCA member. He goes, at what stage do you think it would be best for TCA portfolio companies to explore going to Okapi?
I think it's kind of that post-product stage, wherever they are. And again, we will do pre-revenue. Ideally, there's been some revenue. And why we like revenue isn't so much for the dollars that are in there. It's more of the validation of the customer, where you're kind of validating the business model and the value proposition in terms of like what people are willing to pay for it, and just the ability to complete the sales cycle. I mean, so many businesses and some of our current companies, where they end up struggling, and it's the hardest things to kind of predict in the early diligence, is how successful they can be in having a repeatable and scalable sales process, where you can kind of get through the decision point of a customer to say, yes, I want this, and get whatever people they need to in their organization to sign off on it, and sign up for a PO, and then actually go through the process of implementing the new technology into whatever their workflow is, or their tech stack. And that's hard. So even if people can get through it one or two times, even if the dollars aren't that big, just the fact that you're making it through that gauntlet of any internal company is really critical for us. So hopefully that's been demonstrated. I mean, we will do stuff before then, but it's a much lower likelihood that we would proceed, but I'm always happy to take a look.
All right. So this guy's saying you're a nice guy, a positive guy. Okay. So with everything going on, what's your outlook on startup funding in the next 12 months?
Yeah. So as an investor, I'm really excited about this time period, because I think it's going to be great for us with capital to invest in opportunities, not only because I think there are a lot of other VCs that aren't going to have available capital. The VC funding market, I mean, I've been through this after the dot-com bubble bursting in September 11th and after the financial crisis. And I've seen in the 2-year period that the amount of capital raised by venture capitalists to even invest into startups goes down considerably, so it's good news for people like us, where we will have we have capital and we'll have capital to invest over the next couple of years. So it's less competitive for us, but that's not good news for existing entrepreneurs that are out there now. Yeah. The pool of available capital is shrinking, which isn't great. So, whereas I feel like we're going to have better opportunities to, our selection is going to increase because there's going to be more opportunities to choose from. It's going to be less competitive, and pricing is coming down. So I think that's going to serve my investors. Yeah,
you mean valuation, right?
Valuation, yeah. Sorry, valuations are coming down. Yeah. But I think that it's harder for entrepreneurs, unfortunately. And now that's not good news, of course. I think on the flip side, I think the COVID pandemic, in particular, has really created some massive tailwinds and some real accelerant accelerating trends for a number of different categories, where startups are going to have a chance to go at a faster pace than they might have otherwise. I think bigger I'm finding, and even within our current portfolio, bigger companies or customers, I should say, however you want to call them, whether they're individuals, schools, businesses, government agencies, they're moving faster than they would otherwise if you have solutions that address some of their problems around work from home or distance learning, or some of these categories that are benefiting from the massive disruption that we've all experienced in the global economy over the last 5 months, not to mention social disruption. I mean, I think there are opportunities. Like, if you have a solution to problems in those areas, this is actually a great time for you. Even though there's less capital, generally you're going to get the sales cycles are going to compress. Your business, your technology is going to get adopted quicker. You're going to have more willing customers ready to take on your products. I mean, even in the FDA, I mean, for people that are doing health, things in the health space, I mean, they've compressed some of the emergency, I forget what it's called, the acronyms EULA, I forget, emergency use something, I forget what it stands for, but they've compressed that FDA approval process from 6 to 12 months to 6 to 12 weeks. And, that translates into huge amount of saved money, having to fund your business for 12 months to get to a decision point. Now you can fund it for 12 weeks. So your dollars can get stretched farther now. And another thing that's also good for startups now is that, and again, it's the silver lining to bad news. I mean, there's 40 million unemployed Americans out there right now, and a lot of them are folks from the tech industry. There's more available talent now than there has been in a very long time. Wages have come down, or in the process of coming down. So you can kind of get your startup up and running with some other talent that wasn't either affordable or available in this window of this period. So it's going to be harder to raise capital. It's going to be harder to raise capital, but there's some other things going for startups that are solving some of the problems areas in where there's been this severe disruption that can make it more attractive, where I think that they'll do well. And then with that traction, the money will come. Because there is money on the sidelines that people are looking to invest, and people want to get it behind the businesses that are have some momentum behind them.
Yeah. So you've answered a lot of the questions. As you're answering questions, you've answered a lot more than just the directed one. Or the direct question, but this one has a little bit more to it. Where would a fantasy sports startup look for funding? They have a 95% completed app. Would it be best to try to continue funding it themselves, or maybe work on getting additional funding?
Yeah, man. So I'm a huge sports fan. So this has been so frustrating over this time period, because I can't watch any of my teams and games. And so, and I play fantasy sports as well. So I get it. So I'm missing out on some of that stuff. I mean, obviously in the very near term, it's a little bit of a tough sell when the teams aren't even back, and there's a kind of uncertainty around sports in general at the moment. But I think as more certainty is developed around that, I think investors will get more comfortable. I mean, with any of these businesses, the farther along you can get your product. So hopefully, you say it's 95% done. So I guess if it's somewhat usable, if there's some season that's going on, if you can do like Bundesliga soccer in Germany or something, like utilize the app for some sport where you can have some people, at least in a beta test, utilizing it and can prove out that, like, does it work risk. I would try to get past that. I mean, the other space is really, so fantasy sports has been around for, 25 years, making it really clear about, all right, does the world need another fantasy sports tool? Like, why what you guys are doing?
Different.
Why is it different? Why is it essential? How's it going to fit in this really crowded landscape? There are these entrenched interests of, all the other existing fantasy sports teams. Like, what audience are you trying to win? And, to the degree that you need to take them from somewhere else, or maybe it's a new type of audience, like making that really clear in your pitch, because it's one, like, will the product work? But then this is market. It's a very established market, and a mature market. How are you going to gain market share? So, to the degree that you feel like you can answer technology and kind of market entry risk, whenever you feel like you have strong answers on those, go for the capital.
Yeah, market penetration is going to be really hard. So this is from Daniel, and so I don't know if that's something that you fund or not, but they're trying to fund an incubator. is that something that you potentially work with, or is that, or where can they raise capital for an incubator?
Yeah. Well, we would definitely be happy to work with you, Daniel, on the companies coming out of your incubator. We don't invest in incubators. Some VCs do. Absolutely. Some of the bigger ones in particular. So these are going to be the funds that are like the Series A and later stage funds, where they will get involved with an incubator, where they feel like it's an opportunity to kind of get access to early deal flow, or in some cases, they're making really small investments in those deals early on, very tiny. It could be like 25 grand or whatever. So there are some firms set up to do that. I think here in Southern California, Upfront Ventures may be the only one that really does that I know. But to be honest, I haven't asked the question, so I just don't know. But if another way to find it is if you find venture firms that have these scout funds. Some venture firms that are really large in later stages have these scouts who aren't VCs, but they're typically entrepreneurs. Maybe they're CEOs of current startups or former CEOs of a company that recently exited, or sometimes they're even journalists. Like Neil Bloom, who's a great guy who covers Orange County and San Diego. He's a scout, I think, for Upfront. If funds have these scouts that are out and about, they're kind of willing to write these small checks to kind of be involved with a group to look at early deal flow. So there are a few people out there who do that. It just, unfortunately, we're not one of them.
Yeah. There are a bunch of questions around. So, and I'm going to jump to Yuri's asking again, what is the range? Well, Yuri, I think Jeff answered it. He said $500,000 to 1.5 million. That's kind of an average range for them. Let's see what else. So your thought about event help for a simple mechanical idea. Do you know what event help is?
I don't actually.
It's one of those, they help you invent and patent a product, and they do a lot of commercials on TV. So he's not familiar. We're going to jump over that one.
Sorry, I don't know. I'm going to check it out though. I'm curious, so I'm writing this down. I'm going to look at it. Thank you for bringing that up. I haven't seen this. I'll maybe make one comment related to that for people who are doing hardware stuff. I would be on IP and filing for patents and so forth. That's a potential real trap for people. And it can be very expensive with like very limited reward. If you're doing something that is truly novel, really like there's nothing else out there like it, by all means, yes, do go that patent route. If you are making an incremental improvement, don't get suckered into feeling like you should be filing for patents. It is, aside from it being time consuming, it takes a lot of your early capital out of the gate. And ultimately, if you were to start to be successful, enforcing patents is a hugely expensive process. I mean, I did this at Mophie. So Mophie, we actually had patents, and they were very important. The Mophie Juice Pack, which was a battery case for your phone, it was the first to do that. They had a unique design on how they did it. The patent was really important, but we spent millions of dollars defending that patent and exercising it and getting it out there. And it was a huge effort. So if you really it's not a nice to have sort of thing. It's one of these, a patent. If you're going to have a patent, like know that it's this longer term commitment and really think through, all right, I've got this thing, and am I going to be willing and able to enforce it? Because whoever you're using it against, can sue you back. And if you're, trying to stop a big company from infringing on your little patent, they will hit you back with a whole, book of patents. They'll come right back at you with, and now you've picked a fight with someone that has a limitless budget. So just think really carefully about patents. And I have a lot of friends who are IP lawyers, and they hate me talking about this because it's not good for their business. But be really selective on it. I've just seen so many startups waste so much money in this area, and that money could have been used in so many other space areas to drive their business forward and improve their likelihood of success. And sometimes people just sit and wait. Then they're like, oh, I'm not going to do this and that. There's a lot that you can get done on a trade secret basis and carry things forward, and don't let patents slow you down or take up too much of your money. Again, the caveat is if you've done something that's really truly breakthrough and there's nothing else like it, by all means. But to be honest, a lot of us think we're really bright and exceptional and what we've done is so unique, but most of it's not. Most of it's an iteration on something else that's kind of prior art is the term, but there's some prior art that's out there that's very similar, and it's really hard to get patents that are genuinely enforceable. So anyway, I just figured I'd mention that while we're talking about it, because I get pained on that point.
I agree with you 100% on that. Not many people agree with me and you on that, but I am definitely on the same page as you are. I think unless you have the money to defend it, what are you gonna do? Just spend $20,000-$30,000 and then someone's gonna steal it anyway, and you can't do anything. So.
Right. Especially for software-driven businesses.
Especially for software.
So it's just the patents are pretty useless.
Yeah.
So
last question for you. What are the trends or momentums that you are seeing in SoCal technology ecosystem? I mean, we're trying to really help this ecosystem. What have you seen as far as trends?
Yeah, so there's kind of a couple. They're around kind of e-commerce. I'll call it cybersecurity and mobility-related solutions, and these are all areas of strength for Southern California. So e-commerce, this goes everything from like the real consumer, everything from like Snapchat, which obviously is local, to Dollar Shave Club. But like we've had some major wins in the e-commerce space, e-commerce and or consumer space, I'll call it. I know Snapchat's not e-commerce, but in that space. And what's happened is that we have a really strong legacy and experience base in Southern California, LA in particular, around entertainment, consumer products, consumer goods, branding. But that's a real area of strength, and I think there are a lot of spin-off businesses in that area that are really compelling. I mean, I've made a few that are in a few investments like in the data analytics or kind of brand protection space around e-commerce. But obviously, e-commerce is growing. It's growing faster than ever, because of COVID. And those are benefiting a lot of companies in that space. And there's a lot in Southern California that we're seeing, and we like that. Cybersecurity, we've been lucky here that we've had two really big companies, both in Cylance and CrowdStrike, that have kind of grown up here locally and done really well. And there's a whole slew of engineers and product managers and marketing folks and people who worked at those companies who are kind of out and about and starting to do new things and have learned a lot seeing those businesses scale and understanding those customer bases. And we're seeing a lot of good opportunities there. Plus, it really leverages some of the legacy in Southern California of our engineering base that we have here, whether it's UC San Diego, UCLA, Caltech. I mean, there's a lot of great engineering programs. And for years, a lot of those graduates would go up to the Bay Area because it's like, all right, if you wanted to work in tech, you had to go up there. That's not so much the case now. Like, not only are there more startups for people to work at here, but even some of the really big companies, whether it's Google or Facebook, Amazon, like they've set up corporate campuses here in SoCal. And they're hiring that talent and keeping it here. So I think there's more, talent in that space that we're really excited about. And then this last part is around mobility, and some of that kind of spins out of Qualcomm. But we even found that with Mophie. We were very deliberate in choosing. I mean, granted, it was a consumer electronics business. But we had there was batteries and we had the form factor and we had our own ASIC and we were writing our own PCBs, and like we that talent base was here though in Southern California to do that. We chose it very deliberately. There was a chip making business here, and a lot of people are too young to remember. But in the 90s, in fact, now I just drove past on Jamboree, like that was that Jazz Semiconductor plant. Now it's a bunch of condos. But there is that legacy here, whether it's Broadcom and others, like where that talent and know-how is here in the mobility space, which kind of really created the industry. And there are a lot of startups in that space, and I'll lump fintech into that, where I think it was like leveraging that mobility platform. So those are some of the trends that we're seeing.
All right.
We love the diversity of this region.
Yeah, I think so too. So believe it or not, it's just about an hour. But before I ask you to do one recommendation for the listeners as entrepreneurs, I'm going to do some closing. So while I'm doing that, please think of one recommendation that you can provide to them. So while you're doing that, I'll say, if you have not subscribed to our YouTube channel, please do right now. Just click on subscribe while you're listening to us. Also, don't forget to follow us on social media. The recording of this program will be available by tomorrow morning on YouTube. So if you go to YouTube/Pismo Ventures, you'll be able to listen to the recording or share it with your friends. I'll say one more thing. We on June, so next week we have Bart Greenberg and Bruce Ichkowitz. They're going to talk about the legal side of the startups and the entrepreneurship, from team incentives to IP protection, which we kind of talked about it a little bit right now. Also, there's a workshop on June 18th. So that's next Thursday. Don't miss it. It's going to be great. It's a marketing workshop. All right, Jeff, what's your one recommendation?
Sure. It is choose your co-founders wisely and carefully. I've seen, I talked about, being involved with the startups like a marriage, and it takes longer than most marriages last. A lot of the biggest challenges I've seen with startups have been when the founders don't get along, and it's usually this: they don't have aligned interests. They don't want the same thing. They define success differently. So don't just choose somebody who's available and, someone who's convenient to bring on board. Be really thoughtful. I mean, think of it like a marriage. It's a huge, huge decision, and what you're embarking upon in the startup is so difficult. It's harder than marriage. And, it can be a source of a lot of problems, and unwinding it, like a divorce is messy and can really kill everything. So it's something that I find that people they kind of rush into things when they're launching a business, and they see, someone like, oh, they seem great on paper, and they don't take the time and do the diligence of really understanding who they are and understanding their values and really focus on that. I could not.
How to work with them. It's not just that. So it takes time. Yeah.
It takes a huge amount of time, and it can be the source of just everlasting problems and strife. And try to, it is in your control out of the gate. So just, do that. Pick whether it's not only your co-founders and, all employees, but especially those co-founders. If you're, one or two people looking to add, to those first key people out of the gate.
Really cool. I mean, I'm telling you, I've seen during the past 12 years I've been investing, I've seen a lot of those where it actually, the people, it's about the people regardless, right? We talked about that. But, co-founders split up. They don't have the same vision, the same, ultimate objective, and then they split up, and then investments go bye-bye.
Yeah, it's so big. So I think just being really clear when you ask each other, like, what does success look like for you? What do you want out of this business? And trying to get alignment up front. If you don't have that sort of alignment, definitely stop. But that's my main one. And there's lots potentially, but if there was just one, I think that'd be the one.
All right, Jeff, you've been awesome. Thank you so much for being here today. Everybody's given us feedback how great you were, and I'm sure we'll get a lot more feedback later, but I really appreciate you being here and providing a lot of valuable information.
Awesome. Thank you very much, JJ. Appreciate you hosting this. Thank you, and thanks for everybody for watching.
Take care, and go surfing, okay? Go surfing.
I will. Get out there. Thank you.